Welcome to this edition of Inside Insurance. My name is Jean Ray and I'm your host for the series. Today we're going to focus on the role of the CRO and current hot topics for CROs. I'm delighted to be joined by Louise Delahunty and also Edel for the discussion today. Just a bit more background on them. So Louise Delahunty is an accomplished Chief Risk Officer with over 20 years experience in the financial services industry. Following her training as an accountant with PwC, Louise spent 8 years in the central bank where she developed her experience in risk management, governance and compliance. While she was there, she was promoted to head of insurance supervision, where she led a division of approximately 70 people to ensure effective prudential supervision of more than 200 insurance firms across life, non-life, reinsurance, cross-border health and captives. Building on this, she continued to develop high-performing teams, most recently with Zurich Insurance Europe, AG, which is Zurich's, main legal entity for writing insurance business in Europe. There she recently led a high-performing team of risk specialists, 20 risk specialists across Europe, including 7 CROs within the European branch network. So Edel then, also a CRO, but a chief actuary with Irish Life Group. She's over 25 years experience in the insurance sector. Edel has a diverse range of experience across actuarial risk and compliance roles, with responsibility for firms across insurance, investment and the intermediary sectors. She's held a number of CRO and Chief Compliance Officer roles for regulated entities in the Irish Life Group before taking on responsibility in more recent years for oversight roles across the overall Irish Life and Canada Life groups in Ireland. Very impressive bios. So thank you both. I suppose to get started, we might start with a high level question, and I'm fortunate to have somebody with both non-life and life experience with me. So we might start maybe just by understanding, from your perspective, what some of the biggest opportunities and challenges are for the sector at the moment. Louise, might come to you first for the non-life lens on that.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah. I suppose as CROs, it's easier to think of the challenges rather than the opportunities sometimes. But if you were to think of challenges as opportunities, maybe two of the bigger topics that's on every CRO's agenda at the moment is sustainability and cyber. And thinking about sustainability, it's a great opportunity for insurers to kind of support local communities as they kind of move towards a greener economy. And in terms of that whole cyber and the way that risk is moving, it's an opportunity for insurers to protect customers and businesses from those cyber threats. But I suppose ultimately the opportunities lie in how well you know your customer, and that knowledge and that touch point with customers is how you identify, local opportunities and build on that as a business.
And Edel, maybe the life perspective on some of that as well.
Exactly. So I think similarly, climate and cyber, no matter what industry you're in, are top of the list. But maybe on the life assurance side, I was thinking that so many of the products that we sell are dependent on the life stage of the customer, that it's worth thinking about the demographic changes that we've seen in Ireland over the last number of years. The Irish population has been growing year on year now for over 25 years, obviously driven a lot by migration, but I thought it was interesting that even during the financial crisis, we had a mini baby boom. So the population kept growing despite the number of people who were leaving. And that mix of babies and migration has meant that, the population is now at its highest level that it has been since the famine. And given the level of educational attainment we have in the economy, our working population has actually been growing at a faster rate than the overall population. And that presents huge opportunities on the life assurance side, particularly in the employee benefits side of things, but also in terms of individuals. Wealth is being accumulated by individuals in the Irish economy at a rate we really haven't seen at any other time in the history of the state. And for the life assurers, as we think about what's happening on the pension side, there's a huge opportunity there kind of for the industry. Clearly, the flip side of that is the structural challenges that growth has driven. Whether it's across housing, obviously the key one, it's health, it's education. Those pressures in the system are really going to, I think, challenge us in the future in terms of whether we can continue on that growth trajectory and really benefit from that population growth. And, in terms of challenges, we do have to think about that negative sentiment towards migrants, which I think we've unfortunately seen here recently. We probably thought we were insulated against it to some extent, but we've started seeing it, and fundamentally it's driven by those structural issues which really have to be addressed. So I think as challenging as our roles as CROs are, I wouldn't fancy being part of the next government having to come in trying to figure out how to address that.
And I think in that you touched on some emerging risks and some risks which are kind of BAU type risks, I suppose. I suppose from your perspective as CROs, what would you consider to be some of the key emerging risks or high priority risks at the moment? I don't know, Louise, if you want to take that one first.
Well, I think something we always talk about, and you touched on there, is the geopolitical risk, and all the social unrest that we're seeing here and across Europe. And I suppose that's a challenge, and it's so unpredictable, and it can bring a huge cost, notwithstanding the human cost, but also the commercial cost as well. And then the macroeconomic environment, things seem to be okay economically at the moment, but that's also very unpredictable and can have a massive impact on balance sheets. So that's something that's hard to predict. Obviously then you have the technology risks. So, we touched on cyber already, and that's, hard. It's hard to, I think, when it comes to IT risk, it's important to keep your basics right and make sure that you are managing your systems currently as well as you can. And that's hard for insurers sometimes with all the legacy systems that they have and all the requirements for basics like patching. And then you have to get your head around, AI and all the innovation and how cyber is developing. And it's just a full agenda, and there's a lot to think about there.
Edel, anything to add on that one?
Very similar. I think that piece about the macroeconomic climate is very important, because Ireland obviously is a small open economy. We're very much impacted by what's happening in Europe. We're obviously keeping a close eye on what's going to happen with the US elections. If you look at just that concentration of high earners, of tax generation coming through foreign direct investment, we certainly need to be looking beyond our own borders, I suppose, in terms of concerns. I was thinking back, if you had suggested 2 years ago, I think when we were looking at the economic environment, and you had suggested that a stress test you were going to run was going to be to have ECB marginal lending rates at 4.5%, you'd have been laughed out of the room, I have to say. So just that huge change over the last couple of years, even though inflation has come back to a more manageable level, probably a little bit higher than the economists would ideally like, but still more predictable, we have to think about how we prepare our businesses for the unexpected in the future, I think, on the economic side. And just, we can't be complacent, as you say, that the positives that we've seen over the last number of years are going to continue. So how are we best insulated against those changes if they happen?
Yeah, you're right. I suppose the importance of stress testing now, all of these risks kind of highlight how important it is to think of even what 2 years ago would have sounded like crazy scenarios, are kind of becoming more realistic now. So while it provides a good narrative, it's also kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of our businesses, I suppose, at the moment, they're built on ambitious growth plans. And, you do say, as you look maybe on the life side more, if you look at the demographics, the likelihood is that will be the trajectory we'll follow. But just businesses need to ensure that they don't think that that's the only way that things can go over the next number of years.
That kind of leads us in nicely. I suppose you both have significant experience, and I suppose what do you think has changed most over your career, and I suppose what do you think is most important for success right now? Edel, I might come to you on that one first.
As I thought about that one, I have to say, I think it's probably the focus on consumers is one of the big changes that I've seen over the last 20 years or so. If you think about making improvements to your processes or designing new products, probably when we were doing it back in the day, it was all about what was most efficient for the company, or what was the product that it was most likely that financial advisors would find attractive, therefore that they would sell to their customers. But these days, and it's both within firms and I would say across the regulatory environment too, it's more about thinking from the perspective of the customer, about what does the customer need, how do we ensure that their journey through this insurance process, which, some things like whether it's buying a mortgage on the banking side or it's taking out a pension on the life side, they're very material financial decision points in your life. So we need to make sure that the process they follow is clear to them, that they understand what's going on. And you have to really design processes with that in mind. So I think that's really positive, that even though we're certainly not perfect in terms of how we do that, it's much more likely to be an early thought in the development process as to what it's going to mean for the customer.
And just your perspectives on that one?
Yeah, I agree with Edel. I think that like it's great the way the focus on the customer and trying to know your customer better has changed. And I think from my perspective, governance and accountability has also changed, even if you just look at the way that's developed over the past decade. Like we have to record everything, document it, and even the agenda of a CRO now is so broad. And how do you report on all that on a quarterly basis to your board risk committee succinctly is a challenge now. And every INED is looking for shorter board packs, so it's hard to bring it all together sometimes. But certainly there's definitely more transparency. There's definitely stronger processes and better controls in place, which I think benefits everybody. But there is a cost to all that, so you have to balance that cost with also growing a business. And I think that's a challenge for every insurer, no matter what sector you're in.
Yeah. I think it's probably the other area that I touch on, and maybe this is very specific to the CRO agenda. There's been quite a change in the risks that we consider, and I suppose the ones that are front of mind and probably get the most time and discussion. Risk functions initially would have been very much on the financial side, certainly at life, thinking about your asset liability management, thinking about your counterparty default risk, thinking about investment limits. And whilst that's obviously still incredibly important, there's a robust framework in place to develop it. So now the items that really have you scratching your head or even keeping you awake at night are much more likely to be related to things like your technology risk, like your consumer protection issues, how you end up benefiting from AI without putting undue risk into the business. It's very much more on the operational risk side that we're spending more of our time and having to really think, how do we report on it? Because the financial ones, they can be easier to report on. They're harder metrics that you can develop, and it's easier to see when things are working well or going badly. But I suppose the advantage of that on the operational side is I think we've also seen a bit of a change from risk being seen as something that was done by the CRO off in a corner with the pointy heads to actually being something that the business need to consider as they work through new initiatives, and that it really becomes part of what they do in order to develop the outcomes. So that for me has been one of the big positives over the last number of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way the role has expanded and changed is what's attractive about risk management, being in risk management at the moment. It's just the variety that you get, and the fact that you're involved in every part of the business, which sometimes can be a challenge because sometimes you are expected to be an expert in every area, but then you also get exposure to a variety of different activities, which is also good for experience as well.
Yeah, that's true. Might change tack for a minute, because I suppose I have the privilege today to have two senior female leaders in the insurance sector with me, role models as well, and I suppose I can't leave today without touching on D&I. So I suppose what's your thoughts on the journey so far, and your views maybe on what's left to do and what work can be done Might come to you first, Mary-Louise, on that one as well.
So in terms of D&I, I think lots of work has been done by the insurance sector and by financial services in general to I suppose develop talent, so that no matter whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you're what background you have or what sexuality you are, if you're the right talent for a role, that you're successful. So I think there's been huge initiatives. I think lots of insurance companies now are more open about bringing your whole self to work, and I think that's really important. And I think, but I think one of the challenges for D&I is that sometimes you can get so caught up in lots of initiatives that you don't necessarily think about the outcomes that you want, and maybe don't stay as focused on those outcomes. So I think it's important that just that momentum behind, I suppose, the breadth of D&I and keeping that momentum is really important.
Edel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Mary-Louise's comment about bringing your whole self to work was really important, because I think the inflection point that we're on at the moment is that phase one of diversity was really about saying no matter who you are, you can come to the table, but when you come to the table, you have to behave in much the same way as the people who've been there all along. Whereas now it's a little bit about saying, in order to be open to people of both genders, of every background, you actually have to think about whether the workplace actually suits a more diverse population. Because if you think of a household, it was very easy in the past. If you were the person who was working and you had a spouse at home, the caring responsibilities you didn't have to worry about. So a work culture that's an always on, that's a lot of entertaining and so on, it works. Whereas if you now have two individuals with caring responsibilities who actually have to sort that out, how do you ensure that the workplace is sufficiently balanced, that you can actually say, well, yes, I have caring responsibilities that I have to deal with, but I can still take on this senior role, I can tackle this big piece. And I think the other item probably to look at is on the gender side, maybe at the moment, is where we've encouraged female talent. So I think today, running a session with CROs, I'm hoping it was reasonably straightforward to get two people to the table. But if you were saying, well, actually, I want somebody who leads a distribution business, I want a CEO, it becomes that little bit harder to find the female role models. So it's about saying every area is open, rather than it just being specific ones where you can succeed.
And if you bring it back to kind of the customer again, like reflecting your customer base in your senior management and around the board table, I think is important too, just to, again, for the success of the business. I mean, there's lots of data there that, supports that diversity of thought in terms of achieving greater profitability. So there's definitely, I think, while great work has been done, there's lots more to do.
Yeah, because I think the focus, as you said earlier, it has been very much on gender. But now, given the radically changed makeup of the Irish population, and in particular the working population, I really don't think that across the insurance industry, at least, that our senior leaders reflect that new mix in in Ireland. So we do just need to think about how we tackle that sort of as the next step on this journey.
I suppose on that theme of the future then, I suppose if you were to take out the crystal ball, where would you see the role of the CRO going in the future? And I think Mary-Louise, we'll start with you again, sorry.
If you don't mind, Edel.
Okay.
So I think, like Edel touched on this already, like the CRO has a huge agenda. And I think lately when you think about, operational resilience, like you're saying, recovery planning, a lot of the regulatory type work is landed maybe on the CRO's desk. But I think the CRO of the future, in order to, make sure informed decisions are made and good strategic decisions are made, should be, at that business partner and be at the table and be involved in the key strategic decisions, so that there is that balanced view. at the board table, and I think the CRO of the future will have to balance that responsibility, being independent and being able to apply their judgment, but also, you know, making sure that they have that voice at the table and that they're partnering with the business to support it as it grows.
Any thoughts on that one?
No, I think Mary-Louise has covered it. It is about taking where we are today and moving on. It's those operational risk pieces, I think, are the ones where we will see continued growth in terms of what the CRO has to do. And I suppose, as I touched on to an extent before, we need to continue to embed that idea that risk management belongs to everybody across the business, and that the role of the CRO is really just an oversight of what's happening everywhere across the business, rather than in some areas being the one person or the team who actually does the specific actions that need to be taken to manage risk about the business. So probably more of an evolution than a revolution, I suppose, in terms of the role over the next number of years.
Yes, we've covered a huge amount of ground today. I suppose, Edel, if there was one thing for the audience to take from today's conversation, what would that be?
I think it's probably just how broad the role of the CRO is. You know, when you move into a risk function, you really have to walk into it thinking that it isn't just about the numbers, it's about how the business overall operates. In order to be a good CRO, you have to be interested in every aspect of the business, in what happens across each department, how they interact with each other, and really how what happens in one part of the business can have, unfortunately, a negative impact on everything else that's happening. So maybe just to say, it's worth encouraging people to say, if you haven't considered risk as a career in the past, it is something that has a great breadth and does offer lots of opportunities to individuals from a range of backgrounds. You know, you have an accountant and an actuary here, who are probably the two most typical people that you find in risk roles. But particularly on that operational risk side, you know, there's opportunities for lots of people to contribute to the agenda.
I agree, and if you link it back to our D&I conversation, I think because of the variety of work that we have, I think a role in risk management is suitable for people with lots of different backgrounds, and that, you know, we should be open to that as well, and encourage it.
Yep. Right, well, thanks very much. Hugely, as I say, interesting and insightful conversation. So thanks for your time today. So as usual, if any of the topics resonated with you today, please feel free to get in touch with myself or your usual KPMG contact. Thanks a million for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.